Hey everybody, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about enzymes, do a little review on enzymes, and I will explain a little bit about some things that can affect enzymes. Okay, so if you remember, when we talk about any kind of molecule, the shape of the molecule determines the function of the molecule. And that's definitely true with enzymes. The shape is really, really important. If you did the lactose extra credit, it talked about how the enzyme lactase specifically affects the sugar lactose. And so if you look at this little example here, it says bell work, but this is a little bit of an example. So this right here, if you look at it from the beginning to the end, this looks exactly the same from the beginning to the end. So this would be the enzyme. Letter A would be the enzyme. Beginning to end, it looks exactly the same. We would have a substrate right here, which would be letter C. C would fit right into the enzyme at the active site. So number 3 would be letter B, the active site. It would fit right in there. It forms the enzyme substrate complex, and the enzyme does its job acting on that substrate, and then what happens is that it then detaches, and in this case the substrate gets broken down into two pieces, and these two would be called products. In this case, since it started with one thing as a whole and it broken down into two, we would call this a decomposition reaction. So in the case of lactose and lactase, lactase would be the enzyme, lactose would be the sugar. It would connect together, and then the lactose would get broken down. The enzyme lactase can continue to work and can work on tons of other molecules, and it can just keep going and going and going. People who are lactose intolerant are missing that enzyme, and so they can't break down lactose, and it causes a lot of discomfort for them. So what we're going to talk about today is what are some conditions that affect enzyme action. So if you think about what we've learned before, we've learned about temperature, and you guys probably know that temperature in general tends to speed things up. If you think about the reaction that we did with the food coloring, dissolving, diffusion, it tends to speed things up. So if you're watching this graph here, it's increasing, 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 and then it gets to a certain point. Look at that enzyme. Look what happens. So I'm going to let this go again. So the molecules are moving faster, temperature is increasing. Gives a little pause here, and then it just keeps increasing, and they get to react more as that happens. But then you reach a point where it gets just too hot, and then it goes down. And I want you to watch this time what exactly happens to the enzyme. These black things are the enzymes. And as you watch them go, okay, so it's speeding up, they're interacting more often, increasing, but then it starts to get too hot, and look at it unraveling there, and it's just kind of floating away. So that right there is kind of what's happening here. This is a little mistake here. This says too hot behind it. But if you look here, the enzyme and the substrate, they can connect. You start to heat it. In this case, you heat it above 40 degrees, and you have this situation where the enzyme shape changes. When the shape changes and it can't work anymore, that's called being denatured. It can't bind anymore, and it's denatured. Not a good situation for the enzyme. It can't work anymore when that happens. So the other thing that can affect it, so temperature is one thing that can affect it. The other thing that can affect it is pH. If you remember about pH, pH is a measure of the amount of hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions in a solution. We talked about the pH scale. Right in the middle is 7, neutral. Many things in our human body work at a pH of 7. Not everything, but most things like a pH of 7, nice and neutral. You get lower than that, you get to be acidic. You get higher than that, you get to be basic. The farther away from 7, the stronger you get. And so if you think about pH and you think about what's happening with pH, and there's always an optimal pH that can happen for enzymes as well. And in the optimal pH, their shape will kind of be ideal, and they will work exactly how they're supposed to. But then if the pH changes, starts to get too acidic or too basic, this shape can change very much like how the enzyme change with the temperature, and it can denature. And when it denatures, it doesn't work as well. So if you look at a graph, and I know this is kind of a crazy graph, there's a lot of things going on here, but if you look at what's actually happening in this graph, there are three enzymes we're looking at. We're looking at pepsin, we're looking at urease, and we're looking at glycine oxidase or glycine oxidase. And what's happening here is each one is being tested in different kinds of pHs. And pepsin works really well in the beginning. Very low pHs. You would call this optimal right here, probably right around a pH of 2, very acidic, strongly acidic, and it works great. But then the pH gets higher, closer to neutral, and look at what happens to that enzyme activity. Down, 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 down. And when you get close to neutral, pepsin doesn't work at all. Pepsin actually is an enzyme that can be found in your stomach. It helps to break down protein. And you probably have heard about stomach acid. And you know that that's, if it's an acid, it's probably pretty acidic. So it makes sense that pepsin would work inside of an acidic condition. Urease, quite different. It functions at an optimal pH of right around neutral, right around 7. And then this glycine oxidase seems to work a little bit more basic. This has an optimal temperature right about 9. So if you look there, each one has its own best or optimum temperature, but then they each also have the denaturing temperatures where they're breaking apart and they're not working anymore. So those are some things that can affect enzymes. Your assignment for last week was to do a little graphing on that, and then we're going to look at a little lab this week where you can actually see how different things can affect the activity of an enzyme. So good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.